Charlotte Whitmore never imagined her wedding day would feel like a funeral. Standing at the altar in borrowed white, she's not marrying for love. She's being sold. Her groom is Roman DeLuca, the most feared Mafia boss on the East Coast, a man whose name alone makes grown men tremble. Her father's debts have made her a bargaining chip, a sacrifice wrapped in lace and lies. But when Roman lifts her veil and their eyes meet, Charlotte's breath catches. She knows those eyes. She knows that face. He is the masked stranger from one reckless night years ago, the man who disappeared with her heart and never gave it back. If you're hooked already, stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale travels. Tink. The chapel was too quiet. Charlotte stood in the narrow hallway behind the sanctuary, her hands trembling as they clutched the bouquet of white roses her stepmother had shoved at her 20 minutes earlier. Through the crack in the door, she could see the rows of guests, strangers mostly, men in expensive suits with cold eyes, and women dripping in diamonds that probably cost more than her father's entire failing business. None of them were here for her. They were here for him. Roman DeLuca. The name alone sent a chill down her spine. For weeks, she had heard whispers about the man she was being forced to marry. A ghost in a tailored suit, a king without a crown, the kind of man who built empires on fear and blood, whose word was law in the darkest corners of the city. People didn't cross Roman DeLuca. They didn't even look at him wrong. And now, Charlotte was supposed to become his wife. "You look beautiful, sweetheart." Charlotte flinched at the sound of her father's voice. David Whitmore stood beside her, his face pale and drawn, his hand shaking worse than hers. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting to fall. "Don't call me that," Charlotte said quietly, her voice brittle. "You lost the right to call me that the moment you sold me." David's face crumpled. "Charlotte, please, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." She turned to face him, her green eyes blazing. "You gambled away everything we had. You made deals with people you couldn't pay back. And when they came to collect, you didn't offer them money or property or anything else. You offered them me." "I had no choice." David's voice cracked. "They were going to kill me, Charlotte. Kill me. I did what I had to do to survive." "And what about me?" Charlotte's voice broke, tears burning behind her eyes. "What about what I have to do to survive?" David looked away, shame written across every line of his face. "Roman DeLuca is a powerful man. He'll take care of you, protect you. You'll want for nothing." "Except freedom," Charlotte whispered. "Except a choice." Before David could respond, the heavy wooden doors to the sanctuary swung open. A tall man in a black suit stepped through, his expression unreadable. Charlotte recognized him from the brief, humiliating meeting 3 days ago when the arrangement had been finalized. Luca Moretti, Roman's right hand, his enforcer. "It's time," Luca said simply. Charlotte's stomach twisted into knots. This was it, the point of no return. David reached for her hand, but she pulled away. She couldn't bear his touch right now, couldn't bear the weight of his guilt and desperation. If she was going to walk down that aisle and bind herself to a monster, she would do it alone. The music started, a haunting melody that sounded more like a dirge than a wedding march. Charlotte took a deep breath and stepped through the doors. The sanctuary was enormous, all dark wood and stained glass that filtered the late afternoon sunlight into shades of crimson and gold. The guests turned to look at her, their faces a blur of curiosity and calculation. She kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, on the altar where a figure stood waiting. Roman DeLuca. Even from a distance, he was imposing, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that probably cost more than most people made in a year. His dark hair was swept back from his face, revealing sharp, aristocratic features that belonged on a Renaissance sculpture. But it was his eyes that held her attention. Dark, intense, unreadable, and fixed entirely on her. Charlotte's steps faltered for just a moment. There was something about the way he was looking at her, something that made her skin prickle with awareness and her heart beat faster. Not fear exactly, though there was plenty of that. Something else. Something she couldn't name. She forced herself to keep walking. The aisle seemed to stretch on forever. Each step brought her closer to the man who would own her, control her, decide her fate. She tried to imagine what her life would be like after today. Would he lock her away in some gilded cage? Use her as a decoration on his arm at parties and business dinners? Discard her when he grew bored? Would he hurt her? The thought made her stomach clench with fear. She had heard stories about men like Roman DeLuca, men who took what they wanted and destroyed anything that got in their way, men who saw people as tools, assets, things to be used and discarded. But when she finally reached the altar and Roman extended his hand to help her up the steps, his touch was gentle, almost careful. Charlotte looked up at him, and the world seemed to tilt on its axis. Up close, he was even more striking. His features were hard, carved from stone and shadow, but there was something about his eyes that caught her off guard. They were dark brown, almost black, framed by thick lashes that would have been beautiful on anyone else. On Roman, they were simply arresting, and they were staring at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Charlotte," he said quietly, and the sound of her name on his lips sent a shiver down her spine. The priest began speaking, his words washing over her in a meaningless drone. Charlotte barely heard him. She was too focused on Roman, on the way he was looking at her, like he was trying to memorize every detail of her face. Like he already knew her. The thought was absurd. They had never met before the brief, horrible meeting 3 days ago when her father had signed away her future. Roman had barely looked at her then, his attention focused on the contracts and terms being negotiated. She had been a commodity, nothing more. So why was he looking at her now like she was the only person in the room? "Do you, Roman Amadeus DeLuca, take Charlotte Rose Whitmore to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." His voice was deep and smooth, with just a hint of gravel that made something low in Charlotte's belly tighten. The priest turned to her, and Charlotte felt the weight of every eye in the room pressing down on her. This was her last chance to run, to refuse, to fight. But where would she go? What would she do? Her father's debts were real. The men he owed were real. If she ran, they would find her, find him. And the consequences would be so much worse than this cold, business-like marriage. At least Roman DeLuca was powerful enough to protect her from them. At least he could keep her safe, even if he owned her. "Do you, Charlotte Rose Whitmore, take Roman Amadeus DeLuca to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Charlotte opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I do," she whispered. The words felt like a death sentence. Roman's hand tightened slightly on hers, and she looked up at him in surprise. There was something in his expression now, something that looked almost like relief. "You may kiss the bride." Charlotte's heart stopped. She had managed not to think about this part, about the fact that she would have to kiss this stranger, this dangerous man who now had legal claim to her, about the fact that this was just the beginning of a lifetime of touches she didn't want, intimacies she hadn't chosen. But when Roman lifted his hand to her face, cupping her cheek with surprising gentleness, Charlotte's thoughts scattered like ashes in the wind. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, and she shivered. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away, to refuse. But Charlotte found herself frozen, caught in the dark intensity of his gaze, and then his lips touched hers. The kiss was soft, careful, nothing like what she had expected from a man with his reputation. His mouth moved against hers with a tenderness that made her chest ache, and for just a moment, Charlotte forgot where she was, forgot the guests watching with calculating eyes, forgot the prison she had just walked into. For just a moment, there was only this, the warmth of his lips, the gentle pressure of his hand on her face, the way her heart was racing like she had just run a marathon. And then, just as suddenly, it was over. Roman pulled back, his dark eyes searching her face, and Charlotte saw something there that made her blood run cold and hot all at once. Recognition. He knew her. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Those eyes, that touch, the careful way he had kissed her, like he was afraid she would break. She knew him too. "No," Charlotte breathed, her voice barely audible. "It can't be." But before she could finish the thought, Roman's hand slipped down to her waist, steadying her as her knees threatened to give out. His expression was unreadable now, all emotion locked behind that impenetrable mask he wore so well. "Smile," he murmured, his lips barely moving. "They're watching." Charlotte turned her head and saw that he was right. The guests were all staring at them, some with approval, others with naked curiosity. Her father sat in the front row, his face buried in his hands. Her stepmother looked relieved, probably already calculating how much Roman's protection would be worth. Charlotte forced her lips into something resembling a smile. Roman kept his hand on her waist as they turned to face the guests. The priest was announcing them as husband and wife, but Charlotte barely heard the words. Her mind was reeling, tumbling over itself as fragments of memory crashed through her carefully constructed walls. 3 years ago, a masquerade ball, a stranger in a black mask. One night that had changed everything, and now He was her husband. The reception was held at Roman's estate, a sprawling mansion on the outskirts of the city that looked like something out of a Gothic novel. High stone walls surrounded the property, and armed guards were posted at every entrance. Charlotte had ridden in the back of a sleek black car with Roman, neither of them speaking, the silence between them heavy with unasked questions. Now she stood in the ballroom, a glass of champagne she hadn't touched clutched in her hand, watching as Roman moved through the crowd of guests like a shark through dark water. Dangerous, graceful, completely in control. Men approached him with respect bordering on fear. Women watched him with hunger in their eyes. He acknowledged them all with the same cool politeness, never smiling, never letting his guard down. But every few minutes, his gaze would find hers across the room, and Charlotte would feel that same electric jolt of recognition. He remembered. The thought terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "You're handling this better than I expected." Charlotte turned to find Luca Moretti standing beside her, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp. Up close, he was even more intimidating than she had realized, tall and powerfully built, with a scar that cut through his left eyebrow and cold blue eyes that missed nothing. "What choice do I have?" Charlotte asked quietly. Luca's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. "None, but most women in your position would be crying or trying to run by now." "Would you stop me if I tried?" Without hesitation. There was no malice in his voice, just simple fact. "You belong to Roman now. That means you're under his protection, and mine." "Protection," Charlotte repeated bitterly. "Is that what we're calling it? Better than the alternative." Luca's gaze swept the room, cataloging threats and allies with practiced ease. "Your father made a lot of enemies, Mrs. DeLuca. Powerful enemies. Without Roman's name attached to yours, you'd be dead or worse within a week." Mrs. DeLuca. The name sounded foreign to her ears. "Why did he agree to this?" Charlotte asked suddenly. "Roman, I mean. My father's business is worthless. I'm worthless. What could he possibly gain from this marriage?" Luca was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "That's a question you should ask your husband." Before Charlotte could respond, Roman appeared at her side, his hand settling on the small of her back with possessive ease. "Luca," he said, his tone pleasant but edged with warning. "I believe there are some guests who need your attention." It wasn't a suggestion. Luca inclined his head and melted back into the crowd, leaving Charlotte alone with Roman. "Are you all right?" Roman asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Charlotte looked up at him, studying his face for any sign of the man from that night 3 years ago. The man who had made her laugh, made her feel beautiful and wanted and alive for the first time in her life. "Who are you?" she whispered. Roman's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Your husband." "That is not what I mean." Charlotte set down her champagne glass before she dropped it. 3 years ago, the masquerade ball at the Rosewood Hotel. You were there." It wasn't a question. Roman's hand tightened slightly on her back. "Yes." "You knew." Her voice was shaking now. "When you agreed to marry me, you knew who I was." "Yes." "Why didn't you say anything? Would it have changed anything?" Roman's dark eyes bore into hers. "Would you have wanted this marriage if you knew?" Charlotte opened her mouth to say yes, then stopped, because the truth was, she didn't know. That night at the masquerade had been the most magical, terrifying, intoxicating experience of her life. She had danced with a stranger and felt more alive than she had in years. She had kissed him in a darkened alcove and felt the world fall away. And then she had run. Run because she was scared. Run because he was too much, too intense, too dangerous. Run because she knew that if she stayed, she would give him everything, and she had nothing left to give. "I looked for you," Roman said quietly. "After that night, I searched for months." Charlotte's breath caught. "Why?" "Because you made me feel human again." His voice was rough, stripped of its usual control. "For one night, I wasn't Roman DeLuca, feared Mafia boss. I was just a man dancing with a beautiful woman who made him laugh." "I didn't know who you were," Charlotte whispered. "I know. That's why it mattered." Roman's hand moved from her back to her face, tilting her chin up so she had to meet his eyes. "When your father came to me with his proposal, I didn't care about his business or his debts. I agreed because I recognized your name, because I finally had a chance to find the woman who disappeared on me." Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes. "So this is all about that night? About some fantasy you built up in your head? No. Roman's thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. This is about the fact that I've never forgotten you, never stopped wanting you, and when I was given the opportunity to make you mine, I took it. I'm not a thing to be owned, Charlotte said, but her voice lacked conviction. No, Roman agreed. You're not, which is why I'm going to give you a choice. Charlotte blinked in surprise. What? Stay married to me, and I'll protect you from your father's enemies. I'll give you everything you could ever want. Safety, security, freedom to do whatever you please, as long as you don't betray me. His eyes were intense, burning with an emotion Charlotte couldn't name. Or I'll annul the marriage. Give you enough money to disappear somewhere your father's creditors will never find you. You'll be free of me, free of this life. Why would you do that? Charlotte's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. Because I want you to choose me, Roman said simply. Not because you're afraid, not because you have no other option, but because you want to. Charlotte stared at him, her mind reeling. This was Roman DeLuca, one of the most powerful and dangerous men on the East Coast. He could have anything and anyone he wanted. He could keep her prisoner if he chose, and no one would stop him. But he was offering her freedom. The question was, did she want it? I need time, Charlotte said finally, to think. Roman nodded slowly. Take all the time you need. But Charlotte? He leaned down until his lips were almost brushing her ear. Don't run from me again. Not this time. The word sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with fear. The rest of the reception passed in a blur. Charlotte smiled and nodded at the appropriate times, accepted congratulations from people whose names she immediately forgot, and tried not to think about the man who stood at her side like a dark angel. Her husband. The word still felt surreal. Finally, mercifully, the last of the guests departed. Charlotte found herself standing in the massive foyer of Roman's estate, suddenly exhausted and overwhelmed. The adrenaline that had carried her through the day was fading fast, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. Your rooms are ready, Roman said, his voice gentle. Maria will show you up. Charlotte turned to find a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair standing nearby. She was dressed in simple black, but there was a quiet dignity to her that commanded respect. Come, Mrs. DeLuca, Maria said warmly. You must be exhausted. Charlotte followed her up a sweeping staircase to the second floor, then down a long hallway lined with portraits of stern-faced men who looked like they had never smiled in their lives. DeLuca ancestors, probably. Roman's family tree, built on blood and power. Maria stopped in front of a set of double doors and pushed them open, revealing a suite that took Charlotte's breath away. The rooms were enormous, decorated in shades of cream and gold with touches of deep blue. A massive bed dominated the bedroom, its posts carved from dark wood and draped with silk. Through an open doorway, Charlotte could see a bathroom that looked like something out of a luxury spa. Mr. DeLuca had these rooms prepared especially for you, Maria said, bustling around and turning on lamps. Your things have already been brought from your father's house. If you need anything at all, just press this button. She indicated a discreet panel on the wall. Someone will come right away. Thank you, Charlotte managed. Maria smiled and squeezed her hand. Welcome home, dear. Then she was gone, and Charlotte was alone. She walked slowly through the rooms, taking in the details. Fresh flowers on the dresser, expensive toiletries in the bathroom, a closet that had been stocked with clothes that were exactly her size and style. Roman had clearly done his research. Charlotte caught sight of herself in a full-length mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Her wedding dress was beautiful, all lace and silk and tiny pearls, but it felt like a costume, like she was playing a part in someone else's story. She was reaching for the zipper when she heard a soft knock on the door. Come in, she called, expecting Maria. Instead, Roman stepped through the door, still dressed in his wedding suit, but with his tie loosened and his jacket discarded. He looked tired, Charlotte realized. The iron control he had maintained all day was starting to slip, revealing glimpses of the man underneath. I wanted to make sure you had everything you needed, he said. Charlotte's hand was still on her zipper. I'm fine. Roman's gaze traveled over her, and something heated flickered in his eyes. Do you need help with that? Charlotte's breath caught. The thought of his hands on her skin, slowly drawing down the zipper, made her pulse race. No, she said, but the word came out breathless. Roman took a step closer, then another, until he was standing right in front of her. Close enough that she could smell his cologne, something dark and expensive and utterly masculine. "I meant what I said earlier," he told her quietly, "about giving you a choice. I won't force you into anything you don't want." "And if I never want to share your bed?" Charlotte challenged, lifting her chin. Roman's lips curved in a small, dangerous smile. "Then I'll have to convince you otherwise." "That sounds like a threat." "It's a promise." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "I'm a patient man, Charlotte, and I've waited 3 years to have you in my life again. I can wait a little longer." Charlotte's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "What if I choose to leave?" "Then I'll let you go." His eyes were intense, burning with an emotion that made her knees weak. "But I don't think you will." "Why not?" "Because I saw the way you looked at me today. The way you're looking at me right now." Roman's thumb brushed across her lower lip, and Charlotte's breath hitched. "You remember that night just as clearly as I do. You felt what I felt." "That was different," Charlotte whispered. "We were different people then." "Were we?" Roman leaned down until his forehead was almost touching hers. "Or were we just wearing different masks?" Charlotte couldn't think, couldn't breathe. All she could focus on was the heat of his body, the intensity in his eyes, the way her skin tingled everywhere he touched. "I should go," Roman said, but he didn't move. "Yes," Charlotte agreed, but she didn't step back. They stood there for a long moment, frozen in that electric space between wanting and having. Charlotte's entire body was trembling with need and fear, and something she was afraid to name. Finally, Roman stepped back, breaking the spell. "Good night, Charlotte," he said, his voice rough. "Good night," she whispered. He turned and walked to the door, then paused with his hand on the handle. "These rooms connect to mine through that door." He indicated a door Charlotte hadn't noticed before. "It's unlocked on my side. If you need anything, or if you change your mind about wanting to be alone, you know where to find me." Then he was gone, leaving Charlotte alone with her racing heart and tangled thoughts. She walked to the door he had indicated and pressed her palm against the smooth wood. On the other side, she could hear the faint sounds of movement. Roman, getting ready for bed. Her husband. Charlotte closed her eyes and tried to slow her breathing. What had she gotten herself into? And why did part of her, a treacherous, reckless part she had tried so hard to bury, want to open that door and find out? Charlotte didn't sleep that night. She lay in the enormous bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind refusing to quiet. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Roman's face, felt his touch on her skin, heard his voice promising to wait for her. But it wasn't just the present that haunted her. It was the past. 3 years ago, she had been a different person. Fresh out of college, working a mind-numbing job at her father's company, watching him make increasingly desperate decisions as the business spiraled toward bankruptcy. She had felt invisible, insignificant, like she was drowning in a life that had been chosen for her. And then her best friend had dragged her to that masquerade ball. Charlotte rolled onto her side, pulling the silk sheets up to her chin. She could still remember every detail of that night with perfect clarity. The way her hands had trembled as she tied on the silver mask, the champagne that had gone straight to her head, the music that had thrummed through her veins like a second heartbeat, and the stranger in the black mask who had asked her to dance. She had never learned his name, hadn't wanted to. For one perfect night, she had wanted to be someone else entirely, someone brave and reckless and free. He had made her feel like the only woman in the room. His hands on her waist had been possessive but gentle. His voice in her ear had been dark and rich, saying things that made her blush and laugh and forget everything except the moment. They had danced for hours, talked about everything and nothing. And when he had pulled her into a shadowed alcove and kissed her with a hunger that stole her breath, Charlotte had kissed him back like she was drowning and he was air. She had wanted more, wanted everything, wanted to follow him wherever he led, and that terrified her. So she had run, slipped away while he was getting them drinks, disappeared into the crowd, and never looked back. She had told herself it was the right decision, that getting involved with a stranger, no matter how magnetic, was foolish and dangerous, that she needed to focus on her real life, not some fantasy spun from champagne and shadows. But she had never forgotten him, never stopped wondering what might have happened if she had stayed. And now she knew. He was Roman DeLuca, a man whose empire was built on violence and fear, a man who could destroy her with a word, a man who was offering her a choice. Charlotte sat up abruptly, unable to lie still any longer. She walked to the window and pulled back the heavy curtains, looking out over the grounds. The estate was massive, surrounded by walls and guards and enough security to protect a small country. A prison wrapped in luxury. But Roman had said she could leave. Why didn't she want to? The answer scared her more than anything else. Because despite everything, the forced marriage, the danger, the cold reality of who and what Roman was, part of her still felt that same pull, that same magnetic attraction that had drawn her to him 3 years ago. She wanted to open that connecting door and go to him. Charlotte pressed her forehead against the cool glass, frustrated with herself. She was supposed to be smarter than this. She had watched her father make terrible decisions driven by desperation and greed. She knew what happened when people let emotion override logic. But logic hadn't been in the room when Roman had touched her face and told her he had never stopped wanting her. A soft knock on the door made her jump. "Come in," she called, expecting Maria. Instead, it was a young woman she didn't recognize, carrying a tray laden with breakfast items. "Good morning, Mrs. DeLuca," the woman said with a shy smile. "Mr. DeLuca thought you might be hungry." Charlotte realized she was starving. She had barely eaten anything at the reception, too nervous to keep anything down. "Thank you," she said, gesturing toward the small table by the window. The woman set down the tray and hesitated. "Mr. DeLuca asked me to tell you that he'll be in his office all morning if you need anything, and that you're free to explore the house and grounds as you wish." Free. The word hung in the air like a challenge. After the woman left, Charlotte picked at the breakfast, her mind still racing. She needed to think clearly, to make a plan. But first, she needed to understand exactly what kind of world she had married into. She showered and dressed in one of the outfits from the mysteriously well-stocked closet. Dark jeans and a soft cashmere sweater that probably cost more than her old car. Then she set out to explore her new prison. The house was even more massive than she had realized. Endless hallways lined with expensive art, rooms that looked like they had never been used. A library that made her breath catch with its floor-to-ceiling shelves and rolling ladders. She was running her fingers along the spines of leather-bound books when she sensed someone watching her. Beautiful, isn't it? Charlotte spun to find Luca leaning against the doorframe, his arms crossed over his chest. "It's overwhelming," she said honestly. Luca's lips twitched. Most of this stuff belonged to Roman's father, and his father before him. The DeLucas have always believed in showing their power. "And what do you believe in?" Charlotte asked. "Survival." Luca pushed off the doorframe and walked into the library, his movements fluid and controlled. "Everything else is secondary." Charlotte studied him. Up close, the scar through his eyebrow was more pronounced, and there were others, faint lines on his knuckles, a thin mark along his jaw. This was a man who had fought his way through life and won. "How long have you worked for Roman?" she asked. 15 years, since we were teenagers." Luca pulled a book from the shelf and examined it with casual interest. "He saved my life. I've been returning the favor ever since." "What happened?" "That's his story to tell, not mine." Luca replaced the book and turned to face her fully. "But I'll tell you this. Roman DeLuca is the most dangerous man I've ever known. He's also the most loyal. If you're on his side, he'll burn the world down to protect you. But if you betray him," Luca's eyes went cold. "There's nowhere you could run that he wouldn't find you." Charlotte's mouth went dry. "Is that a threat?" "It's a fact." Luca's expression softened slightly. "Look, I know you didn't choose this, but you're here now, and that makes you part of this family, part of this world. The sooner you accept that, the easier it'll be." "And if I don't want to accept it?" "Then you're a fool." Luca's voice was blunt. "Your father's debts are real. The people he owes don't care that you're innocent. Without Roman's protection, you wouldn't last a week." Before Charlotte could respond, Luca's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his expression hardened. "I have to go. Roman's downstairs if you're looking for him." He paused at the door. "Word of advice, don't judge him too harshly for what he does. You don't know what it costs him." Then he was gone, leaving Charlotte alone with her tangled thoughts. She spent another hour wandering the house, but her feet kept leading her back to the same place. The hallway outside Roman's office. She could hear voices inside. Roman's deep rumble and another man's higher-pitched tone. They were speaking Italian, too fast for Charlotte to follow with her limited understanding of the language. She was about to walk away when the door opened and a man emerged. He was older than Roman, maybe mid-40s, with silver streaking his dark hair and sharp eyes that assessed Charlotte in a single glance. "Ah," he said, switching to English. "The new Mrs. DeLuca. A pleasure to finally meet you properly." Charlotte forced a polite smile. "I'm sorry, I don't think we've been introduced. Marco Valenti. I handle some of Roman's business interests." He extended his hand and Charlotte shook it, noting the expensive watch on his wrist and the calculating intelligence in his eyes. "Charlotte," she said simply. "A beautiful name for a beautiful woman." Marco's smile was smooth, but there was something oily about it that made Charlotte's skin crawl. "Roman is a lucky man." "Is he?" Charlotte kept her voice neutral. Marco laughed. "A woman with spirit. I can see why he wanted you." His eyes traveled over her in a way that made her want to step back. "If you ever grow tired of him, do let me know." "That's enough, Marco." Roman's voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like a blade. He stood in the doorway of his office, and the expression on his face made Charlotte's blood run cold. There was murder in his eyes. Marco's smile didn't waver, but Charlotte saw him tense. "I was just being friendly. You were being disrespectful." Roman's voice was still soft, still controlled, but the threat in it was unmistakable. "To my wife, in my home. Roman, leave, now." The words were clipped, final. Marco's jaw tightened, but he nodded and walked away without another word. Charlotte watched him go, her heart pounding. When she turned back, Roman was looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I'm fine," Charlotte said, though her hands were shaking slightly. "He didn't do anything." "He looked at you like you were something he could take." Roman's voice was rough. "Like you were his to claim." "But I'm not," Charlotte said quietly. "Am I?" Roman crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. He stopped close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, but he didn't touch her. "You're mine," he said, and the possessiveness in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. "By law, by contract, and by choice, and anyone who forgets that will answer to me." Charlotte tilted her head back to meet his eyes. "I haven't made a choice yet." "Haven't you?" Roman's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "You're still here." "You said I could leave." "I did. The offer stands." His dark eyes searched hers. "But I don't think you want to." Charlotte's heart was racing. She should step back, should put distance between them, should remember that this man was dangerous and this situation was insane. But she didn't move. "Why me?" she asked instead. "You could have anyone. Why does it have to be me?" Roman was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw with an honesty that took her breath away. "Because you're the only woman who ever made me forget who I am," he said. "The only one who looked at me and saw a man instead of a monster. Do you have any idea what that's like? To spend your entire life being feared, being used, being treated like a weapon, and then to meet someone who just saw you?" Charlotte's throat tightened. "I didn't know who you were." "Exactly." Roman's other hand came up to frame her face, holding her gently but firmly. "You danced with me because you wanted to. Kissed me because you wanted to. Not because you were afraid or because you wanted something from me. Just because in that moment, you wanted me." "I barely knew you," Charlotte whispered. "You knew the parts of me that mattered." Roman's forehead dropped to rest against hers. "And then you ran, and I spent 3 years trying to find something even close to what I felt that night. I never did." Charlotte closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his breath on her face. "This is crazy. I know. I should say no. I should walk away. Probably. But I can't stop thinking about that night, about you." Roman's hands tightened on her face. "Then stay. Not because you're afraid, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you want to see where this goes." Charlotte opened her eyes and found him watching her with an intensity that made her knees weak. "And if it doesn't work? If we can't make this real? Then I'll let you go," Roman said. "I promise. But give us a chance first. Give me a chance to show you that this doesn't have to be a prison." Charlotte knew she was making a mistake. Knew that getting involved with Roman DeLuca would complicate her life in ways she couldn't even imagine. But looking into his eyes, feeling the way her heart raced at his touch, she realized she had already made her choice. Maybe she had made it 3 years ago, when she danced with a stranger in a mask and felt more alive than she ever had before. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay." Roman's eyes blazed with something fierce and possessive. Say it again. I'll stay, Charlotte repeated, stronger this time. I choose to stay. The kiss was nothing like the careful, controlled one at their wedding. This was hunger and need and 3 years of wanting crashing together all at once. Roman's mouth claimed hers with a desperation that stole her breath, and Charlotte kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands fisting in his shirt. He backed her against the wall, his body pressing against hers, and Charlotte felt heat pool low in her belly. This was what she had wanted that night 3 years ago. This was what she had been too afraid to take. But she wasn't afraid anymore. Roman's hand slid into her hair, tilting her head back so he could deepen the kiss. Charlotte gasped against his mouth, and he swallowed the sound, one hand dropping to her waist to pull her even closer. Charlotte, he groaned against her lips. If you want me to stop, tell me now. Don't stop, she breathed. Roman pulled back just enough to look at her, his dark eyes burning. You're sure? Charlotte reached up and pulled him back down to her. I'm sure. They barely made it to his office. Roman kicked the door shut behind them and lifted Charlotte onto his desk, scattering papers everywhere. She wrapped her legs around his waist, pulling him closer, needing more. His hands were everywhere, in her hair, on her waist, sliding under her sweater to feel the bare skin beneath. Charlotte arched into his touch, her breath coming in short gasps. I've wanted this for so long, Roman murmured against her neck, his lips tracing a line of fire down her throat. Wanted you. Charlotte tilted her head back, giving him better access. Then take me. Sharp knock on the door made them both freeze. Roman. Luca's voice was urgent. We have a problem. Roman dropped his forehead to Charlotte's shoulder with a groan. Can it wait? No. Charlotte felt Roman tense, the heat between them cooling as reality crashed back in. He stepped back, his hand steadying her as she slid off the desk. I'm sorry, he said quietly, his eyes dark with frustration and regret. Charlotte smoothed down her sweater, trying to calm her racing heart. It's fine. It's not. Roman cupped her face, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. But I have to deal with this. Will you wait for me? Charlotte nodded, not trusting her voice. Roman's thumb brushed across her swollen lips one more time before he turned and opened the door. Luca stood there, his expression grim. What is it? Roman asked, his voice hard. Marco, Luca said simply. He's making moves. Roman's jaw tightened. I'll be right there. He glanced back at Charlotte. Maria will show you to the dining room for lunch. I'll find you as soon as I can. Then he was gone, and Charlotte was left alone in his office, her lips still tingling from his kisses and her body still humming with unfulfilled need. She took a shaky breath and looked around. The office was masculine and expensive, all dark wood and leather. Papers were scattered across the desk where she had been sitting moments ago. Some of them had fallen to the floor. Charlotte bent to pick them up, not wanting to leave a mess. But as she gathered the papers, her eye caught on a name. David Whitmore. Her father. Heart pounding, Charlotte spread the papers out on the desk. They were financial documents, records of her father's debts, and something else, a contract. Charlotte's hands shook as she read through it. The terms were brutal. Her father had borrowed money from someone named Viktor Kozlov, a name that made her blood run cold even though she didn't recognize it. The interest rates were predatory, and the consequences for non-payment were spelled out in chilling detail. But it was the final clause that made her stomach drop. In the event of non-payment, the debtor agrees to forfeit all assets, including family members, to be used as the creditor sees fit. Charlotte felt bile rise in her throat. Her father hadn't just gambled away the business. He had literally sold her. And not to Roman, to someone else. The door opened and Charlotte spun around, guilt flooding through her at being caught snooping. But it was just Maria, her expression kind. Mrs. DeLuca, are you ready for lunch? Charlotte looked down at the papers in her hands, her mind reeling. Maria, who is Viktor Kozlov? Maria's face went pale. Where did you hear that name? It's here, in these papers about my father. Charlotte held up the contract with shaking hands. Who is he? Maria was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was heavy with worry. He's a very dangerous man, Mrs. DeLuca. The kind of man even Mr. Roman is careful around. What does he want with my father? With me? I don't know the details, Maria said carefully, but I know Mr. Roman paid a great deal to buy out your father's contract, to protect you. Charlotte felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. Roman bought me from this man? He saved you from him, Maria corrected gently. There's a difference. But Charlotte barely heard her. Her mind was spinning with questions and fears and a growing sense of horror. She had thought her father's debts were simple money problems, business deals gone wrong. She hadn't realized he had sold her to a monster, and Roman had, what, rescued her, claimed her for himself? I need to talk to him, Charlotte said, her voice shaking. I need to talk to Roman, now. Maria bit her lip. He's in a meeting. I don't care. Charlotte was already moving toward the door. Where is he? Maria sighed. The West Wing, third door on the left. But Mrs. DeLuca... Charlotte didn't wait to hear the rest. She practically ran down the hallway, the contract clutched in her hand, her heart pounding with fear and fury and a desperate need for answers. She found the room and threw open the door without knocking. Roman was standing at the head of a long table, surrounded by men in suits. They all turned to stare at her, but Charlotte only had eyes for her husband. Is it true? She demanded, holding up the contract. Did you buy me from Viktor Kozlov? The room went deathly silent. Roman's expression was unreadable. Everyone out! The men didn't need to be told twice. They filed out quickly, avoiding Charlotte's eyes. Luca was the last to leave, pausing at the door. Roman, out, Roman repeated, his voice like iron. When they were alone, he turned to face Charlotte fully. Where did you get that? It was in your office, on the floor. Charlotte's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the paper. Is it true? Did my father sell me to this man? Yes. The simple answer felt like a physical blow. And you bought me from him? Roman's jaw tightened. I paid off your father's debt and acquired the contract. Yes. You lied to me, Charlotte whispered. You made it sound like this was about the business, about protecting me from creditors. I didn't lie. I just didn't tell you everything. That's the same thing, Charlotte's voice cracked. You let me think. You let me believe. What? Roman crossed his arms, his expression hard. That I married you for love? That this was some romantic fairy tale? You said you searched for me. You said you never forgot me. I didn't, but that doesn't change the facts. Roman's voice was cold now, the warmth from earlier completely gone. Your father sold you, Charlotte, to a man who would have used you and destroyed you without a second thought. I stopped that from happening. By making me your property instead? Charlotte felt tears burning behind her eyes. How is that any different? Because I'm giving you a choice. Roman's control cracked, his voice rising. Because I'm not going to hurt you, or use you, or treat you like a thing to be discarded. Because despite everything, despite the fact that this started as a business transaction, I want you to choose to be here. How can I choose anything when you've been lying to me from the start? Charlotte demanded. Roman ran a hand through his hair, frustration written across every line of his body. I was trying to protect you. I don't need your protection. I need the truth. Fine. You want the truth? Roman stalked toward her, his eyes blazing. Your father didn't just borrow money from Kozlov. He got involved in some very illegal, very dangerous business. Arms dealing, money laundering. He was in way over his head, and when he couldn't deliver what he promised, Kozlov decided to take payment another way. Charlotte felt sick. Me. You. Roman's voice gentled slightly. Kozlov wanted you as, let's call it collateral, insurance that your father would keep working for him. And when he was done with you, he would have sold you to the highest bidder or killed you to send a message. Oh my God, Charlotte whispered. When I found out about the contract, I made Kozlov an offer he couldn't refuse. I paid 3 times what your father owed, plus enough extra to make it worth his while to walk away. Roman's eyes were intense. I bought you, yes, but I did it to save your life. Charlotte sank into a chair, her legs unable to support her anymore. Why would you do that? We barely knew each other. Because I remembered you, Roman said quietly. Because in 3 years, I hadn't been able to forget the woman who made me feel human, and because I couldn't stand the thought of Kozlov touching you. Charlotte looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. You should have told me. Would you have believed me? Roman knelt in front of her, his hands resting on her knees. If I had told you on our wedding day that your father sold you to a Russian arms dealer and I bought you to save you, would you have trusted me? Charlotte didn't have an answer for that. Roman reached up and wiped away her tears with gentle fingers. I'm not a good man, Charlotte. I've done terrible things. I'll probably do more terrible things before this is all over. But I swear to you, I will never hurt you, and I will kill anyone who tries." "That's not reassuring," Charlotte said shakily. "It's the truth." Roman's eyes held hers. "I can't promise you a normal life. I can't promise you safety from everything. But I can promise you that as long as you're mine, I will protect you with everything I have." Charlotte closed her eyes, trying to process everything. Her father had betrayed her in the worst possible way. Roman had saved her, but also trapped her. Nothing about this situation was simple or clean or easy. But when she opened her eyes and saw the raw honesty in Roman's face, she realized something important. He wasn't lying. Not anymore. This was who he was. A dangerous man in a dangerous world. A man who killed and schemed and built empires on blood, but also a man who had remembered her, who had searched for her, who had paid a fortune to keep her safe from something even worse. "I need time," Charlotte said finally, "to think, to figure out what this all means." Roman nodded and stood, but he didn't step away. "Take all the time you need. But Charlotte, don't run from me again. If you decide you can't do this, tell me to my face. Give me that much." Charlotte looked up at him, this man who was her husband and her savior and her captor all at once. "I will." Roman pressed a kiss to her forehead, then left the room, leaving Charlotte alone with the contract and her shattered illusions. She sat there for a long time, staring at the papers that had changed everything. Her father's signature was at the bottom, scrawled and desperate. He had sold her. The reality of it finally sank in, and Charlotte felt something inside her crack. Not break. She was stronger than that. But crack, shift, change into something harder and sharper. She had spent her whole life trying to be good, trying to be the dutiful daughter, trying to make her father proud, and he had sold her like livestock. Charlotte stood slowly, her decision crystallizing in her mind. She couldn't change the past, couldn't undo her father's betrayal or Roman's deception, but she could choose what happened next. She could run, take Roman's offer and disappear with enough money to start over somewhere new, or she could stay. Not as a victim, not as property, but as a woman who chose her own path, even if that path led deeper into darkness. Charlotte walked to the window and looked out over the estate grounds. Guards patrolled the walls, cameras watched every corner. This was Roman's kingdom, built on violence and control, but it was also the safest place she could be. The only place where Viktor Kozlov couldn't reach her. And Roman was complicated, dangerous, possessive. But he had also been honest with her when it mattered, had given her choices even when he didn't have to, had looked at her like she was the only woman in the world. Charlotte took a deep breath and made her choice. She would stay. Not because she had to, not because she was afraid, but because despite everything, the lies, the danger, the impossible situation, she wanted to see where this led. She wanted to know if the connection she had felt 3 years ago could grow into something real. And she wanted to become strong enough that no one could ever sell her, use her, or control her again. Charlotte turned away from the window and walked out of the room, leaving the contract behind. She had a feeling she was going to need all her strength for what came next. Charlotte found Roman in the gym, a space she hadn't discovered in her earlier exploration of the house. He was alone, attacking a heavy bag with controlled fury, each punch landing with brutal precision. His shirt was discarded on a nearby bench, revealing a body carved from muscle and marked with scars that told stories she didn't know yet. She stood in the doorway, watching him. Sweat gleamed on his skin, and the raw power in his movements was mesmerizing and terrifying in equal measure. This was the man who had built an empire on fear. The man who had killed to protect what was his. The man who was her husband. Roman must have sensed her presence because he stopped mid-punch and turned. His dark eyes locked on hers, and Charlotte saw wariness there. Expectation of rejection. "I'm staying," she said simply. Roman went very still. "What?" "I said, I'm staying." Charlotte stepped into the room, closing the distance between them. "Not because I'm afraid, not because I have nowhere else to go, but because I choose to." "Charlotte, let me finish." She held up her hand and Roman fell silent. "What my father did was unforgivable. What you did was complicated. You saved me, but you also lied to me. You gave me choices, but those choices were always limited by circumstances you didn't fully explain." Roman's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. "But I understand why you did it," Charlotte continued. "And I understand that in your world, trust is earned, not given freely. So here's what I need from you going forward. She met his eyes steadily. No more lies, no more half-truths. If we're going to make this work, I need complete honesty, even when the truth is ugly. Done, Roman said immediately. I'm not finished. Charlotte took a breath. I also need you to teach me, Roman frowned. Teach you what? How to survive in your world. How to protect myself. How to be more than just the woman standing behind you. Charlotte's voice was fierce. I spent my whole life being weak, being invisible, being something for other people to use. I'm done with that. If I'm going to stay in this world, I need to be strong enough to stand on my own. Roman stared at her for a long moment, something like admiration flickering in his eyes. You want me to train you? Yes. It won't be easy. The things I would teach you, the things you would need to know, they're not pretty. I don't need pretty, Charlotte said. I need real. Roman crossed the remaining distance between them in 2 strides. His hands came up to frame her face, tilting her head back so she had to meet his eyes. You're sure about this? About staying? About all of it? I'm sure, Charlotte whispered. The kiss was different this time. Not desperate or hungry, but deep and claiming and full of promise. Roman kissed her like she was something precious, something worth protecting. And Charlotte kissed him back like she was choosing him, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Roman rested his forehead against hers. I won't let you down, he said quietly. You better not, Charlotte replied, because if you do, I'll make you regret it. Roman's lips curved into a rare, genuine smile. I believe you. The sound of slow clapping made them both turn. Marco Valenti stood in the doorway, his expression mocking. How touching, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. The monster and his pet. Roman's entire body went rigid. Charlotte felt the shift in him, the way violence coiled beneath his skin like a living thing. Marco, Roman said, his voice deadly quiet. I told you to leave. You told me to leave the house. I did. But then Luca called and said you needed me for the Kozlov situation. Marco's eyes slid to Charlotte, cold and calculating. Though it seems you've been distracted. Get out, Roman repeated. In a minute. Marco stepped into the room, and Charlotte noticed the way his hand rested near his waist. Near a gun, she realized with a chill. First, I think we need to discuss the reality of your situation. You've made yourself vulnerable, Roman. All for a woman. Careful, Roman warned. Why? Because you'll kill me? Marco laughed, but there was no humor in it. You need me. You need my connections, my resources, my men, and we both know it. Charlotte felt Roman tense beside her, felt the barely controlled rage radiating from him. She also felt something else. Calculation. He was weighing options, measuring risks. You're right, Roman said, and Charlotte's head snapped toward him in surprise. I do need you. For now. Marco's smile widened. Then maybe you should reconsider some of your recent decisions, starting with playing house with your new bride. Or maybe, Charlotte said, her voice clear and steady, you should remember who you're talking to. Both men turned to look at her. Excuse me? Marco's tone was dangerous. Charlotte stepped away from Roman, forcing herself to stand tall even though her heart was racing. You think I'm a weakness, a liability, something you can use against him. She met Marco's cold eyes without flinching. But I'm also a Whitmore, and despite what my father did, that name still means something in certain circles, business circles, legal circles, the kind of circles that could make your life very difficult if I chose to use those connections. It was a bluff, a desperate, reckless bluff. Her father had burned most of those bridges years ago, but Marco didn't know that. Is that a threat? Marco asked softly. It's a fact, Charlotte replied, echoing Luca's words from earlier. I'm not some helpless girl you can intimidate. I'm Roman's wife, and that means I'm under his protection, yes. But it also means I have access to his resources, his power, his influence. She took a step toward Marco. So before you try to use me as a pressure point, ask yourself if it's really worth making an enemy of both of us. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Marco threw back his head and laughed. Well, the pet has claws after all. He looked at Roman. I see why you wanted her. We're done here, Roman said coldly. Luca will brief you on what we need for Kozlov. Stay away from my wife. Marco's amusement faded. For a moment, Charlotte thought he might push back, might challenge Roman's authority. But then he nodded curtly and walked out, leaving tension thick in the air. The moment he was gone, Charlotte's legs went weak. Roman caught her, his arms coming around her waist to steady her. "That was incredibly stupid," he said, but there was admiration in his voice, and incredibly brave. Charlotte laughed shakily. "Was I convincing?" "Very. Though for the record, your father's name is worth exactly nothing in any circles that matter." Roman's hand came up to tilt her chin, forcing her to look at him. "But Marco doesn't know that, and you played it perfectly. I couldn't just stand there and let him talk about me like I was nothing." "I know." Roman pressed a kiss to her forehead. "But Charlotte, you need to understand something. Marco is dangerous, more dangerous than you realize. What you just did, standing up to him, it bought you respect. But it also put a target on your back." "I already had a target on my back," Charlotte pointed out. "At least now he knows I'm not defenseless." Roman's eyes darkened. "You're not defenseless. Not anymore. Not while I'm alive." He stepped back, his expression serious. "But you were right earlier. You need to learn how to protect yourself. Starting today." Charlotte nodded, feeling the weight of what she had just committed to. "Okay. Where do we start?" "First we eat. You can't learn anything on an empty stomach." Roman grabbed his shirt and pulled it on. "Then we talk strategy. If Marco is making moves, we need to be prepared." They made their way to a small dining room Charlotte hadn't seen before, more intimate than the formal one from the reception. Maria had prepared lunch, sandwiches and salad, simple but delicious. Charlotte realized she was starving. As they ate, Roman explained the situation with Marco. The older man had been his father's right hand, inherited by Roman when he took over the family business. Marco had connections throughout the city, relationships that would take years to rebuild if Roman cut him loose. But he was also ambitious, always looking for opportunities to expand his own power. "He thinks I'm weak now," Roman said, his voice hard. "Because I married you. Because I'm letting emotions cloud my judgment." "Are you?" Charlotte asked quietly. Roman looked at her for a long moment. "Yes," he admitted, "but not in the way he thinks. Emotions don't make you weak, Charlotte. They make you human, and humans are capable of things that monsters never could be." Before Charlotte could respond, Luca burst into the room, his phone pressed to his ear and his face pale. "We have a problem," he said, hanging up. "Your father just tried to meet with Kozlov." Charlotte's blood ran cold. "What?" "Apparently he thought he could renegotiate the terms of the original contract. Cut a new deal." Luca's expression was grim. Kozlov wasn't interested in talking. "He sent David back with a message." "What message?" Roman demanded. "That the contract might have transferred to you, but the debt remains unpaid, and he wants what he's owed." Luca's eyes slid to Charlotte. "He wants her." The room fell silent. Charlotte felt like she couldn't breathe. "But you paid him. You bought out the contract." "I paid him for the paper," Roman said slowly, his mind clearly working through the implications. "But if David went to him and admitted there were irregularities in the original agreement, Kozlov could claim I acted in bad faith." "That's ridiculous," Charlotte said. "You paid him 3 times what my father owed." "It doesn't matter." Roman stood, his body coiled with tension. "Kozlov doesn't care about money. He cares about power, about control. And right now, he sees an opportunity to hurt me by taking what's mine." "So what do we do?" Charlotte asked. Roman and Luca exchanged a look that made Charlotte's stomach drop. "We go to war?" Luca said simply. Charlotte shook her head. "No, there has to be another way." "There isn't," Roman said, his voice hard. "Kozlov won't negotiate, won't back down. The moment your father went to him, he painted a target on all of us." "Then let me talk to my father," Charlotte said desperately. "Let me find out exactly what he said, what he promised. Maybe we can fix this." "Charlotte, please, Roman." She grabbed his hand. "Before you start a war that will get people killed, let me try. What's the worst that can happen?" Roman's jaw tightened. "The worst that can happen is Kozlov decides to take you by force, and I have to watch as everything I've built burns down around me while I try to protect you." The raw honesty in his voice made Charlotte's chest ache. "You won't lose me," she said fiercely. "I promise. But I need to do this. I need to face my father and make him understand what he's done." Roman stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Fine. But you don't go alone. And we do this my way." An hour later, Charlotte sat in the back of Roman's car, flanked by Luca on one side and Roman on the other. Two more cars full of armed men followed behind them. They were heading to her father's house, the place Charlotte had grown up, though it felt like a lifetime ago. "What am I supposed to say to him?" Charlotte asked quietly. "Whatever you need to," Roman replied. "But Charlotte, I need you to understand something. Your father made his choices. He put you in danger, twice now. If he can't be trusted to stay quiet, to stay away from people like Kozlov." Roman trailed off, but the implication was clear. "You'll kill him," Charlotte finished. "I'll do what's necessary to keep you safe." Charlotte closed her eyes, trying to reconcile the man beside her. The man who had kissed her so tenderly, who had promised to protect her, with the man who could talk about killing her father so calmly. But she was starting to understand. In Roman's world, there was no room for weakness, no room for mercy when it came to protecting what mattered. And she mattered to him, maybe more than she had realized. The car pulled up to her childhood home, and Charlotte's stomach twisted. The house looked smaller than she remembered, shabbier. The lawn was overgrown, and one of the shutters hung crooked. Roman placed his hand over hers. "You don't have to do this." "Yes, I do," Charlotte said. She opened the car door and stepped out, feeling the weight of Roman's gaze on her back. Luca moved to follow, but Roman stopped him. "Let her go alone, but watch the perimeter. If anything feels wrong, we go in." Charlotte walked up the familiar path to the front door, her heart pounding. She knocked, then waited. Her stepmother opened the door, her eyes widening in shock. "Charlotte, what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to my father," Charlotte said, keeping her voice steady. "Is he home?" "He's not well. The stress has been—" "I don't care," Charlotte interrupted. "I need to see him, now." Her stepmother hesitated, then stepped aside. Charlotte walked through the house, memories assaulting her from every corner. The living room where she had done homework, the kitchen where she had learned to bake cookies, the stairs she had climbed every night to her small bedroom. It all felt like it belonged to someone else now. She found her father in his study, slumped in his chair, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked older than she remembered, grayer, more defeated. "Charlotte," he said, his voice slurring slightly. "My baby girl." "Don't call me that," Charlotte said coldly. "You lost that right when you sold me." David flinched. "I had no choice." "You had a choice," Charlotte's voice rose. "You could have come to me, asked for help, found another way. Instead, you traded me to Viktor Kozlov like I was property. I was trying to protect you by selling me to a man who would have destroyed me." Charlotte laughed bitterly. Some protection. David set down his glass with shaking hands. "Roman DeLuca is no better. He's a killer, a criminal. I thought if I could renegotiate with Kozlov, maybe I could get you back." "Get me back?" Charlotte stared at her father in disbelief. "I don't belong to you. I never did. And what you did, going to Kozlov behind Roman's back, you just put me in even more danger. I was trying to fix things." "You can't fix this." Charlotte's hands were shaking with rage. "You broke it beyond repair. And now Roman is the only thing standing between me and Kozlov, and you're making that harder for him." David's face crumpled. "I'm your father. I'm supposed to protect you." "Then stop trying," Charlotte said quietly. "Just stop. You've done enough damage. Charlotte, I need you to do something for me." Charlotte forced herself to stay calm. "I need you to tell me exactly what you said to Kozlov. Everything. Don't leave anything out." David wiped his eyes and took a shaky breath. "I told him that the original contract was signed under duress, that I didn't understand the terms, that I wanted to make a new deal." "What kind of deal?" "I offered to work for him again, directly, in exchange for canceling the debt entirely." Charlotte's blood ran cold. "And what did he say?" "He laughed." David's voice was hollow. "He said the debt was already paid, but that didn't mean he was giving up his claim on you. He said you belonged to him by right, and that Roman stole you, and that he would take back what was his, one way or another." Charlotte felt like she was going to be sick. "You need to leave the city," she said. "Tonight. Take Helen and go somewhere far away." "I can't just leave." "Yes, you can." Charlotte leaned forward, her eyes hard. "Because if you stay, Roman will kill you, or Kozlov will, and I won't be able to stop either of them." David stared at her in shock. "You'd let him kill your own father?" "You stopped being my father the moment you sold me." Charlotte stood, feeling nothing but emptiness where love used to be. "Leave the city. Don't contact me. Don't try to fix this. Just disappear and pray that Roman never has a reason to come looking for you. She walked out before he could respond, her eyes burning with unshed tears. She had spent her whole life trying to win her father's approval, trying to be the daughter he wanted. And in the end, he had valued her at exactly the price of his debts. Roman was waiting by the car, his expression unreadable. The moment he saw her face, though, his features softened. "Come here," he said quietly, opening his arms. Charlotte walked into his embrace, letting him hold her as the tears finally came. She cried for the father she had wanted but never had, for the innocence she had lost, for the girl she used to be. And when the tears finally stopped, she pulled back and wiped her eyes. "He told Kozlov the contract was signed under duress," she said, her voice steady despite everything. "Kozlov said you stole me, and he's going to take me back." Roman's eyes went dark and dangerous. "Over my dead body." "What do we do?" Roman cupped her face in his hands. "We make Kozlov understand that you're not something he can take, that you're mine, completely and utterly, and anyone who tries to change that will face consequences they can't imagine." "How?" "By making you untouchable." Roman's gaze was intense. "By showing the world that you're not just my wife in name. You're my partner, my equal, and attacking you means declaring war on everything I've built." Charlotte took a shaky breath. "That sounds dangerous." "It is," Roman agreed, "but it's the only way to keep you sane. Are you ready for that?" Charlotte thought about her father, broken and desperate in his study. Thought about Kozlov, circling like a shark. Thought about Marco, waiting for an opportunity to strike. And she thought about Roman, who had saved her, protected her, and was now offering her a place at his side instead of behind him. "Yes," she said. "I'm ready." Roman's eyes blazed with something fierce and possessive. "Then, let's show them what happens when you try to take what belongs to a DeLuca." The drive back to the estate was tense and silent. Charlotte could feel the energy radiating off Roman, the controlled violence that hummed beneath his skin. Luca made quiet phone calls, his voice clipped and efficient as he mobilized resources. When they arrived home, Roman led Charlotte straight to his office. The room was filled with men, his inner circle, Charlotte realized. Soldiers and strategists, all waiting for orders. "Gentlemen," Roman said, his voice cutting through the murmurs, "we have a situation. Viktor Kozlov has decided to challenge my claim on my wife." The room erupted in angry mutters. Charlotte saw shock and outrage on the faces around her. Apparently, challenging a DeLuca marriage was considered a grave insult. "He thinks I'll negotiate," Roman continued, "that I'll give her up to avoid conflict. He's wrong." His hand found Charlotte's, pulling her close to his side. "Charlotte is mine. Anyone who tries to take her will die. Is that understood?" A chorus of agreement filled the room. "Luca, I want eyes on Kozlov's operations, every warehouse, every business, every property. I want to know where he is at all times." Roman's voice was cold. "Marco, you're in charge of securing our own assets. No one gets in or out without authorization." Marco's expression was carefully neutral. "And if Kozlov tries to reach out, to negotiate?" "There's nothing to negotiate," Roman said flatly. "This is war." The meeting continued for another hour, strategies being discussed, and resources being allocated. Charlotte stood beside Roman the entire time, forcing herself to pay attention, to learn the language of this world she had married into. Finally, the men filtered out, leaving Charlotte and Roman alone. "That was intense," Charlotte said quietly. "That was necessary." Roman turned to face her fully. "Charlotte, things are going to get dangerous now, more dangerous than they already were. I need you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you'll stay close, that you won't take unnecessary risks, that you'll let me protect you." Charlotte met his eyes steadily. "I'll stay close, but I won't hide. You said you wanted to show the world I'm your partner. That means I need to be visible." "Visible, yes. Reckless, no." "I'm not reckless," Charlotte protested. Roman's lips twitched. "You stood up to Marco Valenti after knowing him for all of 5 minutes. You confronted your father despite everything he's done. You agreed to stay in a world you don't understand because you're too stubborn to run." He pulled her closer. "You're absolutely reckless, and it's going to give me a heart attack." Despite everything, Charlotte smiled. "But you like it." "I love it," Roman corrected, and the words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning neither of them was quite ready to address. Charlotte's breath caught. "Roman, I know." he said quietly. It's too soon, too complicated. But I need you to know that this isn't just about protecting an asset or honoring a contract. You matter to me, Charlotte, more than anything has mattered in a very long time. Charlotte reached up and cupped his face, feeling the rough stubble beneath her palm. You matter to me, too. Even though you're infuriating and dangerous and possibly insane. Roman laughed, a real laugh that transformed his entire face. Possibly? Definitely, Charlotte amended. She pulled him down and kissed him, pouring everything she couldn't say into the touch of her lips against his. When they finally broke apart, Roman rested his forehead against hers. Stay with me tonight, he said softly. Not because I'm demanding it, not because of any contract or arrangement, but because you want to. Charlotte thought about the connecting door between their rooms, the door she hadn't opened, the choice she hadn't made, until now. Yes, she whispered. I'll stay. Roman's eyes darkened with heat and something deeper. He took her hand and led her through the connecting door to his bedroom. The space was masculine and elegant, all dark wood and rich fabrics, but Charlotte barely noticed the decor. All she could focus on was Roman and the way he was looking at her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. He kissed her slowly, thoroughly, his hands framing her face like she was something precious. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, Charlotte felt safe, wanted, chosen, not because she had to be, but because she wanted to be. And as Roman lifted her into his arms and carried her to his bed, Charlotte realized something important. She was falling in love with her husband, the monster who had saved her, the killer who made her feel protected, the dangerous man who treated her like she was worth dying for. It was reckless and foolish and probably a terrible idea. But it was her choice, and she was done letting fear make her decisions. Charlotte woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the warmth of Roman's body beside her. For a moment, she lay perfectly still, taking in the reality of where she was. His bedroom, his bed, his arms wrapped around her waist like he was afraid she might disappear. She turned carefully, not wanting to wake him, and studied his face in the morning light. Asleep, he looked younger. The hard edges softened, the constant vigilance gone. She could see traces of the man he might have been in a different life, a life without violence and blood and impossible choices. Roman's eyes opened, immediately alert despite having just woken. Old habits, Charlotte supposed. In his world, letting your guard down could get you killed. Morning, he said, his voice rough with sleep. Morning, Charlotte replied softly. They lay there for a moment, neither moving, both acutely aware that something fundamental had shifted between them last night. Charlotte had chosen him fully and completely, and there was no taking it back now. Roman's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. Any regrets? No, Charlotte said, and meant it. You? Never. He leaned in and kissed her, slow and thorough, and Charlotte felt heat bloom in her belly despite the soreness in her muscles. Though we should probably get up. Luca will be here soon with updates. As if on cue, there was a sharp knock on the door. Roman? Luca's voice came through. We have a situation. Roman's entire body tensed. He was out of bed and pulling on clothes before Charlotte could blink. What kind of situation? The kind that needs to be handled immediately. Charlotte grabbed Roman's shirt from the floor and pulled it on, following him to the door. Roman opened it to reveal Luca, his expression grim. Kozlov made a move, Luca said without preamble. He hit one of our warehouses on the south side. 3 of our men are dead. Charlotte felt the blood drain from her face. Roman's expression went cold and deadly. When? He demanded. 2 hours ago. Marco's already there, securing the scene. Luca's eyes flicked to Charlotte, then back to Roman. There's more. They left a message. What message? Luca handed Roman a phone. Charlotte watched as her husband's face went from stone to murderous rage in the space of a heartbeat. What is it? She asked, her voice shaking. Roman turned the phone so she could see. It was a photo of the warehouse wall, spray-painted in red letters large enough to read from across the street. Return what's mine or everyone dies. Charlotte's hands started trembling. He means me. He can go to hell, Roman said flatly. He handed the phone back to Luca. I want every man we have on high alert. Double the security here, and I want to know where Kozlov is right now. Already on it, Luca said. But Roman, this is escalating fast. If we don't respond, we will respond, Roman interrupted. But we do it smart. Kozlov wants me angry, wants me to make mistakes. His jaw tightened. He's not getting what he wants. After Luca left, Charlotte turned to Roman. 3 people are dead because of me. 3 people are dead because Viktor Kozlov is a psychopath who doesn't understand boundaries, Roman corrected sharply. This is not your fault. How can you say that? He wants me. If I wasn't here, if you weren't here, you'd be with him. Roman grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. Being used and destroyed and broken. Is that what you want? Of course not, Charlotte whispered. Then stop taking responsibility for his actions. Roman's voice gentled slightly. Charlotte, I've been fighting men like Kozlov my entire life. This war was coming whether you were here or not. You're just giving me a reason to win it. Charlotte wanted to believe him, wanted to accept that she wasn't responsible for the violence swirling around her, but the image of that message, painted in red like blood, kept flashing through her mind. I need to do something, she said. I can't just hide here while people die. What do you suggest? Charlotte took a breath, the idea forming even as she spoke. Let me talk to him. Absolutely not. Roman, listen. No. His voice was hard. I'm not letting you anywhere near Kozlov. That's non-negotiable. Then what? We just wait for him to kill more people? To keep escalating until this city is a war zone? Charlotte pulled away from him. You said you wanted me to be your partner. That means I get a say in how we handle this. Roman stared at her for a long moment. What exactly are you proposing? A meeting, public, neutral ground, with you right beside me. Charlotte's mind was racing now, the plan taking shape. Let me tell him myself that I'm not going back, that I chose you. Maybe if he hears it from me, he'll back off. And if he doesn't, then at least we tried. Charlotte met his eyes steadily. And maybe we learn something useful. See how he reacts. Figure out what he really wants. Roman was quiet, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded slowly. On one condition. We do this my way. My location, my security. And if at any point I think you're in danger, we're done. Agreed. I mean it, Charlotte. One wrong move from him, and I'm ending this. Permanently. The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Charlotte nodded, understanding that Roman wasn't just protecting her. He was warning Kozlov that any attempt to take her would result in his death. Within the hour, the meeting was arranged. Kozlov agreed to meet at a restaurant Roman owned in the heart of the city, neutral ground in theory, but filled with Roman's people in practice. Charlotte spent the time getting ready, choosing her outfit carefully. She needed to look strong, confident, like a woman who had made her choice and wouldn't be swayed. She settled on a black dress, simple but elegant, and pulled her hair back in a severe bun. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Gone was the uncertain girl who had stood at the altar 2 weeks ago. In her place was someone harder, sharper, someone who could survive in Roman's world. Roman knocked on her door and entered without waiting for permission. His eyes traveled over her, and something heated flashed in them before being replaced by cold calculation. You look like a queen, he said. I feel like I'm going to be sick, Charlotte admitted. Roman crossed to her and pulled her into his arms. You don't have to do this. We can find another way. No, Charlotte said, drawing strength from his presence. This is the right move. I can feel it. Then we do it together. Roman pressed a kiss to her forehead. But Charlotte, remember, Kozlov is dangerous. Don't let your guard down for a second. The restaurant was called Vesper, an upscale Italian place that catered to the city's elite. Charlotte had eaten there once before years ago for her father's birthday. It felt like a lifetime ago now. Roman's men were everywhere, dressed as waiters and busboys and patrons. Luca stood near the entrance, his hand resting casually near his weapon. The message was clear. This was Roman's territory, and anyone who forgot that would regret it. Kozlov was already seated when they arrived, 2 of his own men flanking him. He was older than Charlotte expected, maybe 60, with silver hair and cold blue eyes that assessed her like she was merchandise. She felt her skin crawl under his gaze. Roman, Kozlov said, his accent thick. So good of you to come. Viktor. Roman's hand was firm on Charlotte's waist as he guided her to the table. I believe you wanted to meet my wife. Kozlov's eyes fixed on Charlotte, and she forced herself not to flinch. So this is the girl David Whitmore sold me. She's prettier than the photos. I'm not a girl, Charlotte said, keeping her voice steady. And I wasn't sold to you. That contract was fraudulent and you know it. Kozlov's eyebrows rose. Fraudulent? Your father signed it willingly. Under duress, while drunk, without understanding the full terms. Charlotte leaned forward slightly, which means it's not legally binding. Roman bought you out in good faith, but you have no actual claim on me. Is that so? Kozlov smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. And yet, here we are, negotiating. We're not negotiating, Roman said coldly. We're making something very clear. Charlotte is my wife. She's under my protection. And any further attempts to change that will be met with extreme force. Bold words, Kozlov sipped his wine. But I wonder if you've thought through the consequences. I have resources you can't match, Roman. Allies in places you can't reach. If I wanted to take her, I could. You could try, Roman replied. You'd fail, and you'd die in the attempt. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Charlotte felt the tension coiling around them like a living thing, ready to snap at any moment. Gentlemen, she said, her voice cutting through the standoff, can we discuss this like civilized people? Kozlov's attention shifted back to her. By all means. Tell me, Charlotte, are you here of your own free will, or is Roman holding something over you? I'm here because I choose to be, Charlotte said firmly. Roman gave me the option to leave, to take enough money to disappear and start over somewhere you'd never find me. I chose to stay. Why? Kozlov's eyes narrowed. What could possibly make you choose this life? Charlotte thought about the question, about the truth she was only just beginning to understand. Because I'm tired of being a victim, tired of being something for men to trade and control. With Roman, I have a choice. I have power. I have a future that's mine to shape. She met Kozlov's cold gaze without flinching. You are going to use me and discard me. Roman sees me as a partner. That's why I choose him. Kozlov was silent for a long moment. Then he started laughing, a harsh sound that made Charlotte's blood run cold. A partner, he repeated. How touching. Tell me, Roman, does your little partner know what you really are, what you've done to build your empire? She knows everything she needs to know, Roman said, but Charlotte heard the tension in his voice. Does she? Kozlov leaned forward. Does she know about the families you've destroyed, the people who've disappeared because they crossed you? Does she know that her own father isn't the first person you've bought and controlled? Enough, Roman warned. I'm just curious, Kozlov continued, his eyes on Charlotte, if she truly knows what kind of monster she's bound herself to. Charlotte felt something inside her snap. He's not a monster, she said, her voice sharp. He's a man who does what's necessary to survive in a world that men like you created, a world where power is the only currency and mercy is a weakness. You want to talk about monsters? Look in the mirror. Kozlov's smile faded. Careful, girl. You're making dangerous enemies. I already have dangerous enemies, Charlotte shot back. You made sure of that when you accepted my father's deal. But here's the thing. You don't seem to understand. I'm not afraid of you. You can threaten me, threaten Roman, burn down every building he owns. It won't change the fact that I'm never going to be yours. The silence that followed was deafening. Charlotte could feel Roman's shock, could see the rage building in Kozlov's eyes. She had pushed too far, said too much. But she wasn't backing down. Kozlov stood slowly, his men immediately moving to flank him. This conversation is over, but Charlotte, my dear, you should know something. He leaned down, his voice dropping to a whisper. Your father came to me not just to renegotiate. He came to me because he's terrified of what Roman will do to him, and he offered me something very interesting in exchange for protection. Charlotte's blood ran cold. What? Information, Kozlov said simply. About Roman's operations, his suppliers, his distribution networks, everything I would need to destroy him from the inside out. Roman was on his feet in an instant, his hand moving toward his weapon, but Luca was faster, appearing at his side and placing a restraining hand on his arm. Did you take the deal? Roman asked, his voice deadly quiet. Not yet, Kozlov replied. I wanted to meet your wife first, wanted to see if she was worth all this trouble. His eyes traveled over Charlotte one more time. I have to say, I'm impressed. She has spirit, which is why I'm going to give you both one chance. What kind of chance? Charlotte asked. Walk away, Kozlov said. Annul the marriage. Give her to me, and I'll forget about your father's offer. We can go back to the way things were. Never, Roman said. Then we go to war. Kozlov smiled coldly. And when the smoke clears, I wonder which of you will still be standing. He walked out, his men following, leaving Charlotte and Roman alone at the table. Charlotte's hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them in her lap. My father betrayed you. I know, Roman said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. He's selling you out to Kozlov. Everything you've built. I know, Roman repeated. He turned to her, and the fury in his eyes took her breath away. But right now, I need to make sure you're safe. Everything else can wait. They left the restaurant surrounded by Roman's men, a protective cocoon that felt both suffocating and necessary. Charlotte's mind was reeling. Her father hadn't just sold her once. He was actively working to destroy the man who had saved her, the man she was falling in love with. Back at the estate, Roman disappeared into his office with Luca and several other men. Charlotte could hear raised voices, urgent phone calls, the sound of plans being made and contingencies being prepared. She paced her room, unable to sit still. Her father's betrayal cut deeper than she expected. She had thought she was done being hurt by him, done caring what he did. But knowing that he was willing to destroy Roman to save himself made her physically ill. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Maria entered, carrying a tray of tea. I thought you might need this, she said gently. Charlotte accepted the cup gratefully. Thank you, Maria hesitated. Mrs. DeLuca, I know this isn't my place, but I want you to know something. I've worked for the DeLuca family for 30 years. I watched Roman grow up, watched him become the man he is today. Why are you telling me this? Charlotte asked. Because I've never seen him like this. The way he looks at you, the way he protects you, it's different, real. Maria's eyes were kind. Whatever happens with this Kozlov business, Roman will do everything in his power to keep you safe. But you should also know that he's terrified. Charlotte blinked in surprise. Terrified? Roman? Of losing you, Maria said simply. He's lost so much in his life. His mother when he was young, his father to violence, the few people he trusted to betrayal. You're the first person in years he's let himself care about, and that makes you both his greatest strength and his greatest weakness. The words settled over Charlotte like a weight. She had been so focused on her own fear, her own struggles, that she hadn't fully considered what this meant for Roman. He wasn't just protecting an asset or honoring a contract. He was fighting for the one person who made him feel human. I won't let him down, Charlotte said quietly. I know you won't, Maria replied, but be careful. Men like Kozlov, they know how to find weakness, and they exploit it without mercy. After Maria left, Charlotte stood at the window, looking out over the grounds. Guards patrolled the perimeter. Cameras watched every angle. The estate was a fortress, built to withstand any attack. But Charlotte knew that wasn't enough. Kozlov had her father's information. He knew Roman's operations, his weaknesses, his supply lines. A frontal assault might not work, but there were other ways to destroy an empire. She needed to do something, needed to find a way to help Roman instead of just being the person he had to protect. The answer came to her suddenly, crystallizing with perfect clarity. Her father. If she could get to him before Kozlov did, convince him to stop, maybe she could prevent him from handing over the information that would destroy everything. It was dangerous, probably stupid, and Roman would never approve, but it might be their only chance. Charlotte looked at her watch. It was nearly midnight. Roman was still in his office, planning and strategizing. If she was going to do this, it had to be now. She changed into dark clothes, pulled her hair back, and grabbed her phone. Then she slipped out of her room and made her way through the quiet house. Most of Roman's men were either on patrol outside or in the office with him. The hallways were empty. She made it to the garage without being seen. The keys to one of the cars were hanging on a hook by the door. Charlotte grabbed them, her heart pounding, and slipped into the driver's seat of a sleek black sedan. The garage door opened with a quiet hum. Charlotte held her breath, waiting for alarms or guards or someone to stop her. Nothing. She pulled out onto the long driveway, her hands gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles went white. This was insane. This was reckless. This was exactly the kind of thing Roman had warned her not to do. But it was also necessary. Charlotte made it through the front gate, flashing a brief wave to the guard who must have assumed she had permission to leave. And then she was on the road, heading toward her father's house, toward what might be the biggest mistake of her life. She didn't see the car that pulled out behind her, keeping a careful distance. Didn't see Luca behind the wheel, his phone already pressed to his ear. Didn't hear him say, She's on the move. Should I stop her? Or Roman's response, cold and controlled despite the fury underneath. No, follow her, keep her safe, and call Marco. We're going to need backup. Charlotte pulled up to her father's house 20 minutes later, her heart in her throat. The lights were on inside, and she could see shadows moving behind the curtains. She sat in the car for a moment, trying to calm her racing pulse. She could still turn back. Still call Roman and tell him where she was. Still do the safe thing. But safety wasn't going to stop Kozlov. Wasn't going to save Roman's empire or prevent more people from dying. Charlotte got out of the car and walked to the front door. She knocked, then waited. Her stepmother answered, her eyes widening in shock. "Charlotte, what are you doing here? It's the middle of the night." "I need to see my father," Charlotte said. "Now." "He's not here." "Don't lie to me." Charlotte pushed past her into the house. "Where is he?" "Charlotte, please, you need to leave." "Where is he?" Charlotte demanded. A voice came from behind her, cold and amused. "She's asking about me." Charlotte spun around and her blood turned to ice. Viktor Kozlov stood in the hallway, flanked by 2 armed men. And behind him, looking pale and defeated, was her father. "Hello, Charlotte," Kozlov said, smiling. "How convenient of you to join us. We were just discussing the terms of your father's cooperation." Charlotte's hand went to her phone, but one of Kozlov's men was faster. He grabbed her wrist, twisting it painfully until the phone clattered to the floor. "Let her go," her father said weakly. "She has nothing to do with this." "On the contrary," Kozlov said, moving closer to Charlotte, "she has everything to do with this. You see, I was going to use your information to destroy Roman slowly, systematically, but now that his wife has delivered herself to me, I think we can expedite the process." Charlotte fought against the man holding her, but his grip was like iron. "Roman will kill you for this." "Will he?" Kozlov tilted his head. "Let's find out. Call him, David. Tell him I have his precious wife. Tell him if he wants her back, he'll need to come get her himself." David's hand shook as he pulled out his phone. "Please, just let her go. I'll give you whatever you want." "You already are," Kozlov said. "Now make the call." Charlotte watched in horror as her father dialed Roman's number. This was it. This was the trap Kozlov had been planning all along. He didn't want information or territory or money. He wanted Roman dead. And Charlotte had just given him the perfect bait. The phone rang twice before Roman answered. "Where is she?" His voice was deadly calm, which was somehow more terrifying than if he had been screaming. David's voice shook. "Roman, I'm sorry. I didn't know. Where is she?" Kozlov plucked the phone from David's trembling hand. "Roman, my friend, your wife is here with me, safe, for now." Charlotte heard Roman's sharp intake of breath through the speaker. "If you hurt her, you'll what? Kill me?" Kozlov laughed. "You're welcome to try. Come to the Whitmore house. Alone. Unarmed. And maybe we can discuss terms." "There are no terms," Roman said, his voice like ice. "Let her go and I'll make your death quick." Such bravado, but we both know you'll do whatever I ask to get her back. Kozlov's hand shot out and grabbed Charlotte's chin, forcing her to look at him. "She really has gotten under your skin, hasn't she? The great Roman DeLuca, brought to his knees by a woman." Charlotte jerked her face away from his grip. "He won't come alone. You're a fool if you think he will." "Oh, I'm counting on it," Kozlov said. The more men he brings, the bigger the statement when I kill them all." He released her and turned back to the phone. "You have 30 minutes, Roman. After that, I start removing pieces of your wife and sending them to you." The line went dead. Charlotte's stomach lurched with fear, but she forced herself to stay calm. Roman knew where she was. He was coming. She just had to survive until he got here. "Tie her up," Kozlov ordered. "And David, you're going to help us prepare a proper welcome for your son-in-law." "Please," David begged. "Let Charlotte go. This is between you and Roman." "This became about Charlotte the moment you sold her to me," Kozlov snapped. "The moment Roman stole her from under my nose. The moment she stood in that restaurant and told me she'd never be mine." His eyes went cold. "She made her choice. Now she lives with the consequences." One of Kozlov's men dragged Charlotte to a chair and began binding her wrists with rough rope. She didn't fight. Fighting would only make them hurt her more, and she needed to save her strength. Her stepmother stood in the corner, tears streaming down her face, useless as always. Charlotte felt a surge of contempt. This woman had stood by while David destroyed their family, had said nothing when he sold his own daughter, and now she was doing nothing while Charlotte was taken hostage. "Helen," Charlotte said quietly. Call the police. The police won't come, Kozlov said. Half of them are on my payroll. The other half know better than to interfere in my business. Charlotte's mind raced. She needed to find a way out of this, needed to warn Roman about the trap. But her phone was smashed on the floor, and her hands were tied, and Kozlov's men were armed and watching her every move. Think, she told herself. There has to be something. Why are you doing this? She asked Kozlov, trying to buy time. You could have just taken the information my father offered. Could have destroyed Roman's business quietly. Why make it personal? Kozlov pulled up a chair and sat across from her. Because Roman DeLuca embarrassed me. He came into my territory, paid off a debt that should have made you mine, and took what I claimed. In my world, that kind of disrespect cannot stand. So this is about ego, Charlotte said, about proving you're more powerful than him. It's about maintaining order, Kozlov corrected. If I let Roman take what's mine without consequences, every small-time criminal in this city will think they can challenge me. No, I need to make an example, and you, my dear, are the perfect tool. Charlotte felt cold understanding wash over her. You're going to kill me in front of him. Eventually, but first I'm going to make him watch as I break you. Make him see that all his power, all his violence, all his carefully constructed empire, none of it can save you. Kozlov smiled. And then, when he's destroyed, when there's nothing left of the man who dared to defy me, I'll put a bullet in his head. You're insane, Charlotte whispered. I'm pragmatic, Kozlov replied. There's a difference. The sound of cars pulling up outside made everyone freeze. Kozlov checked his watch and smiled. Right on time. David, go let them in. David stumbled to the door, his face ashen. Charlotte heard voices, footsteps, and then Roman was there, flanked by Luca and a dozen armed men. The moment his eyes found hers, Charlotte saw the fear flash across his face before being replaced by cold fury. Let her go, Roman said, his voice eerily calm. I don't think so. Kozlov stood, positioning himself behind Charlotte's chair. You see, we're going to renegotiate the terms of our arrangement. There is no arrangement, Roman said. There's just you dying tonight. Kozlov laughed and pulled out a gun, pressing it to Charlotte's temple. She felt the cold metal against her skin and forced herself not to flinch. One more step and I paint the wall with her brains, Kozlov warned. Roman stopped, his hands raised. Okay. What do you want? I want you to kneel. The room went silent. Kneel, Kozlov repeated. Acknowledge that I am your superior, that you were wrong to take what was mine. Do that, and maybe I'll let her live. Charlotte saw the calculation in Roman's eyes, saw him weighing options, measuring risks. She also saw something else, resignation. He was actually considering it. Don't, Charlotte said sharply. Don't you dare. Roman's gaze snapped to hers. Charlotte, if you kneel to him, you're done. Everyone in this city will know you can be broken. Your empire will crumble. Charlotte's voice was steady despite the gun at her head. Don't give him what he wants. I'm not letting you die, Roman said, and I'm not letting you destroy yourself to save me. Charlotte held his gaze, trying to convey everything she felt in a single look. I chose this life. I chose you. Stand up and fight. Kozlov's finger tightened on the trigger. How touching, but I'm done waiting. Roman, you have 5 seconds to kneel or she dies. 5, 4, 3. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Charlotte screamed, expecting pain, expecting darkness, but neither came. Instead, Kozlov stumbled backward, a red stain spreading across his shoulder. The gun clattered from his hand. Charlotte's head whipped around to see Marco standing in the doorway, his own weapon raised. You should have killed me when you had the chance, Marco said coldly. Then all hell broke loose. Roman's men opened fire on Kozlov's guards. Luca dove for Charlotte, cutting through her restraints with a knife he produced from somewhere. Roman launched himself at Kozlov, pure rage driving him forward. Charlotte stumbled to her feet, her hands numb from the ropes. Luca grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the door. Come on, he shouted over the gunfire. But Charlotte's eyes were locked on Roman and Kozlov. They were grappling on the floor, each trying to gain control of Marco's fallen weapon. Kozlov might have been older, but he was vicious, fighting with the desperation of a cornered animal. Roman landed a brutal punch to Kozlov's injured shoulder, making the older man howl in pain. But Kozlov's hand closed around the gun, swinging it toward Roman's head. Charlotte didn't think. She grabbed a heavy vase from a nearby table and brought it down on Kozlov's arm with all her strength. The gun went flying, and Roman used the distraction to flip Kozlov onto his back, his hands closing around the older man's throat. "Roman, no!" Charlotte shouted. Roman's eyes were black with rage, his hands tightening. Kozlov's face was turning purple. "If you kill him like this, you're no better than he is." Charlotte grabbed Roman's arm. "Please, don't become the monster he thinks you are." For a terrible moment, she thought he wouldn't stop, thought the violence would consume him completely. But then Roman's hands loosened. He stood, breathing hard, and stepped back. Kozlov gasped for air, coughing and wheezing. Roman looked down at him with cold contempt. "You're finished," Roman said. "Your operations, your territory, your reputation, all of it. I'm going to systematically destroy everything you've built. And when you're left with nothing, when you're broken and desperate and alone, you'll remember that this is what happens when you threaten what's mine." He turned to Luca. "Get him out of my sight. Make sure every criminal in this city knows what happened here tonight. Make sure they know the price of crossing a DeLuca." Luca nodded and gestured to his men. They hauled Kozlov to his feet and dragged him out, still gasping for breath. The room was a disaster. Bullet holes in the walls, broken furniture. 2 of Kozlov's men lay dead. The others had fled. And in the corner, David Whitmore sat slumped in a chair, looking like he'd aged 20 years. Roman turned to him, and Charlotte saw murder in her husband's eyes. "Roman," she said quietly, "let me handle this." Roman looked at her for a long moment, then nodded and stepped back. Charlotte approached her father slowly. He looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I never meant for any of this to happen." "Yes, you did," Charlotte said. "Maybe not this exactly, but you made choices over and over that put yourself first, that put money and pride and desperation ahead of your family, ahead of me. I was trying to protect you." "Stop lying," Charlotte interrupted. "To me, to yourself, to everyone. You weren't protecting me. You were using me, just like you used everyone else in your life." David's face crumpled. "What do you want me to say? That I'm a terrible father? That I failed you? I know I did." "I don't want you to say anything," Charlotte said. "I want you to leave, tonight. Take Helen and go somewhere far away. Somewhere neither Roman, nor Kozlov, nor anyone else in this world can find you." "Charlotte, this is the only mercy you're getting," Charlotte said. "Roman wants you dead. He would be justified in killing you. But I'm asking him to let you go, to let you run away and live with what you've done." She leaned down so they were eye to eye. "But if you ever contact me again, if you ever try to come back, if you ever put me or Roman in danger again, I won't stop him. Do you understand?" David nodded, tears streaming down his face. "Good." Charlotte straightened. "You have 1 hour. After that, if you're still in this city, all bets are off." She walked back to Roman without looking back. He wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "You sure about this?" he asked quietly. "No," Charlotte admitted. "But he's still my father. As terrible as he is, I can't just kill him." "He would have gotten you killed." "I know." Charlotte looked up at Roman. "But I'm not him, and I'm not going to become the kind of person who can order someone's death without feeling anything." Roman studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, we do it your way." He turned to Marco, who was still standing near the door. "Make sure they leave the city. If they're still here by morning, handle it." Marco nodded and left. Charlotte suddenly felt exhausted, the adrenaline draining out of her all at once. She swayed, and Roman caught her immediately. "I've got you," he murmured. "Let's go home." Home. The word settled over Charlotte like a warm blanket. The estate wasn't a prison anymore. It was home, because Roman was there. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. True to his word, Roman systematically dismantled Kozlov's empire. Properties were seized. Business partners were persuaded to switch allegiances. Money was redirected. And through it all, Roman's reputation grew. The man who had protected his wife against impossible odds. The man who had shown both mercy and ruthlessness in perfect measure. Charlotte stood by his side through all of it, learning the intricacies of his world. She attended meetings, offered opinions, helped negotiate deals. And slowly, the other players in Roman's circle began to see her not as a liability, but as an asset, a partner. Marco proved his loyalty in the days following the confrontation, working tirelessly to consolidate Roman's gains. He approached Charlotte one afternoon as she was reviewing contracts in the library. "Mrs. DeLuca," he said, I owe you an apology." Charlotte looked up in surprise. "For what?" "For underestimating you. For treating you like you were just a decoration." Marco's expression was serious. "You saved Roman's life that night. Saved all of us, really. If Kozlov had succeeded, the resulting power vacuum would have destroyed everything we'd built." "I just did what anyone would do," Charlotte said. "No, you did what a true partner would do." Marco extended his hand. "Welcome to the family." Charlotte shook it, feeling a sense of acceptance she hadn't expected to find in this world. 2 weeks after the confrontation, Charlotte woke to find Roman standing by the window of their bedroom, looking out over the grounds. He'd been quiet lately, more thoughtful than usual. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. Roman turned to her, his expression soft in the morning light. "About choices. About the path that led us here." Charlotte got out of bed and went to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Regrets?" "Never." He pulled her close. "But I've been thinking about what you said. About not becoming a monster. About choosing mercy when you can." "What about it?" Roman was quiet for a moment. "I've spent my whole life building this empire on fear and violence. It's all I knew, all I thought I needed." His hand came up to cup her face. "But you've shown me something different, a different kind of strength." Charlotte felt her heart skip. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to be better, not soft, not weak, but more selective about the violence I use, more careful about the choices I make." His dark eyes held hers. "Because I want to build something that lasts, something we can both be proud of." Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes. "You mean that?" "I do." Roman pressed his forehead to hers. "Charlotte, when I married you, I thought I was just reclaiming something I'd lost. A feeling, a connection. I didn't realize you would change everything." "I didn't change you," Charlotte said. "I just reminded you of who you were beneath all the armor." "Maybe," Roman smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. "Either way, I need to ask you something." He stepped back and, to Charlotte's shock, dropped to one knee. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice shaking. "The first time I married you, it was a transaction, a contract. You didn't have a choice." Roman pulled out a small velvet box and opened it, revealing a stunning diamond ring. "So I'm asking you now, properly. Charlotte Whitmore, DeLuca, will you marry me again? Not because you're afraid or because you have nowhere else to go, but because you love me the way I love you." Charlotte's breath caught. He'd never said those words before. Neither of them had. "You love me?" she whispered. "More than anything in this world," Roman said. "More than power or money or the empire I've built. You are everything that matters. So will you choose me? Again? For real this time?" Charlotte dropped to her knees in front of him, framing his face with her hands. "Yes, 1,000 times yes, because I love you too. Even though you're dangerous and infuriating and you drive me crazy, I love you." Roman kissed her then, deep and desperate and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, he slipped the ring onto her finger. "We'll do it right this time," he said. "A real wedding. With people we actually care about. No contracts or debts or forced arrangements. Just us, choosing each other." Charlotte laughed through her tears. "That sounds perfect." The wedding took place 2 months later in the gardens of the estate. It was small and intimate, attended only by the people who mattered. Luca stood as Roman's best man. Maria cried happy tears. Even Marco smiled, genuinely pleased for them. This time, when Charlotte walked down the aisle, she wasn't walking toward a prison. She was walking toward her future, toward a man who had saved her, challenged her, and loved her despite everything. This time, when Roman lifted her veil, there was no shock or fear in his eyes, just love and certainty and a promise that this was forever. This time, when the priest asked if she took Roman to be her husband, Charlotte's "I do" rang out clear and strong, without hesitation. And this time, when Roman kissed her, it wasn't careful or controlled. It was a claiming, a celebration, a declaration to the world that they belonged to each other, completely and irrevocably. The reception was joyful in a way the first one hadn't been. Real laughter, real happiness, real love filling every corner of the space. As Charlotte danced with her husband under the stars, she marveled at how far they'd come. From a forced marriage to a real partnership. From fear and deception to trust and love. "What are you thinking about?" Roman asked, pulling her closer. "About how none of this went the way I expected. Charlotte said. I thought I was being sold into a nightmare. Instead, I found something I didn't even know I was looking for. What's that? Someone who sees me, really sees me, not as a daughter or a commodity or a weakness, but as an equal. Charlotte looked up at him. You gave me that, even when you were being impossible and overprotective and controlling. Roman laughed. I'm going to be those things for the rest of our lives. Can you handle it? I can handle anything, Charlotte said, as long as we're together. Together, Roman repeated, like a vow. Always. 3 years later, Charlotte stood in the boardroom of DeLuca Industries, presenting her proposal to transform several of Roman's more questionable business ventures into legitimate operations. It had been her project for the past year, finding ways to maintain profitability while reducing their dependence on illegal activities. The men around the table listened with respect that would have been unthinkable when she first married Roman. Now she was a known quantity, a force to be reckoned with in her own right. Roman sat at the head of the table, his eyes on her, pride evident in his expression. Any questions? Charlotte asked when she finished. Marco raised his hand. What about the territories we'll have to give up? The partnerships we'll lose? We replace them with better ones, Charlotte said confidently. Legitimate partners who offer long-term stability instead of short-term gains. Yes, we'll take a hit initially, but in 5 years we'll be stronger than ever. And untouchable by law enforcement, Luca added, which means no more raids, no more investigations, no more looking over our shoulders. The vote was unanimous. Charlotte's plan was approved. After the meeting, Roman pulled her into his office and kissed her thoroughly. You were magnificent, he said against her lips. I was persuasive, Charlotte corrected. There's a difference. You're changing the world, Roman said. Our world, anyway. Making it better. Charlotte looked around the office, at the empire they were building together. An empire that was slowly shifting from darkness into light. It wasn't perfect. There were still gray areas, still moments when violence was necessary, but it was better than it had been. More ethical, more sustainable, more human. We're changing it together, Charlotte said. That's what partners do. Roman's phone buzzed with a message. He glanced at it and smiled. What? Charlotte asked. Your father died last night. Heart attack, apparently. He was living in Mexico under a fake name. Charlotte felt a pang of something, not quite grief, but not indifference either. How did you find out? I've been keeping tabs on him, making sure he stayed away. Roman pulled her close. I know you told him to disappear, but I needed to make sure he didn't come back, didn't threaten you again. Charlotte nodded slowly. Thank you. For letting him live long enough to die on his own terms. You gave him that gift. I just enforced your decision. Roman kissed her forehead. No regrets? No, Charlotte said, and meant it. He made his choices. We made ours. That's all there is. That evening, Charlotte stood in the nursery they'd been preparing for the past month, running her hand over the crib that had just been delivered. She was 3 months pregnant, a development that had shocked and delighted them both. Roman appeared in the doorway, watching her with soft eyes. You're going to be an amazing mother, he said. And you're going to be terrifying as a father, Charlotte teased. The poor kid won't be able to date until they're 30. 40, Roman corrected, moving to stand behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. And that's being generous. Charlotte laughed and leaned back against him, feeling safe and loved and completely at peace. This was what she had fought for, what they had built together, a life that was theirs, shaped by their choices, protected by their strength. She thought about the girl she'd been on her wedding day, terrified and alone, being sold to a monster. That girl would never have believed she could be this happy, this strong, this free, but she had been wrong about so many things. Roman wasn't a monster. He was a man who had done monstrous things to survive in a monstrous world, but he was also capable of extraordinary love, fierce loyalty, and surprising gentleness. And Charlotte wasn't a victim. She was a survivor, a fighter, a woman who had taken the worst situation imaginable and transformed it into something beautiful. What are you thinking? Roman asked, his breath warm against her ear. I'm thinking about choices, Charlotte said, about the moment I decided to stay, to fight, to choose you. Best decision you ever made, Roman said with a smile she could hear in his voice. Second best, Charlotte corrected. She turned in his arms to face him. The best decision was choosing to love you. Everything else followed from that. Roman's eyes darkened with emotion. I love you, Charlotte. More than I thought I was capable of loving anyone. I know, Charlotte said softly. And I love you too. Monster, savior, husband, partner, all of it, all of you. They stood there in the nursery, holding each other, while outside the sun set over the estate they had turned from a prison into a home. Somewhere in the city, Roman's empire continued its slow transformation from darkness into light. Somewhere, the life they were building together was taking shape, day by day, choice by choice. Charlotte had started this journey as a woman being sold to the highest bidder. She was ending it as a queen in her own right, standing beside a king who had learned that true power came not from fear, but from love. She had been forced to marry a monster and discovered a man. She had been bought like property and became a partner. She had been a victim and became a survivor. And through it all, she had found the one thing she never expected to find in a world built on violence and control. She had found home, not in a place, but in a person. In the man who had saved her, challenged her, and loved her with a fierceness that made her believe in impossible things. Roman pressed a kiss to her temple, and Charlotte closed her eyes, committing this moment to memory. This feeling of absolute certainty. This knowledge that no matter what came next, they would face it together. Equal, loyal, unshakable, exactly as they had promised.